Okay, we're ready for the jury. Ready for the jury? Yes, Your Honor. Ready.
Jury.
And I didn't. So this is private.
Just okay with them again, please. Yep. Yes, ma'am, thank you.
All right, thank you. The jury's present. You may be seated.
Yes, sir. Thank you.
You may proceed. Thank you, Your Honor. We covered quite a bit this morning. I'm going to try to keep it in that sequence if we can.
Okay.
I'm going to begin with the case 7042, which is Ms. Gunther.
All right.
And on March 7th, 2006, you were involved in the review and analysis of her case.
That is correct.
Did you have an entire copy of her file, her previous file, and so forth at that point? Okay.
There you go.
In that file, was there a memorandum from Jason Bundy, who was the technical lead in that case?
I don't know what you're talking about.
Do you know Jason Bundy, who was the technical lead on that case at the FDLE? It was a Marcy Scott, crime analyst, supervisor, and Lee Clark were involved.
I don't know what you're referring to.
Okay. Did you not receive a report of off-scale data from loci DYS19 in reference to the oral swab from Ms. Gunther?
I would need to see that.
You didn't see that?
No. And we didn't do D19 because that was identifier.
Identifying what?
Identifier, I used the kit Profiler Plus and Cofiler, so I would need to see if that applied to me because there were other analysts that
Okay, so
worked
you would
this
have
case
used
too.
a different technique?
Yes.
At that time, were you reviewing two cases, the oral swab from Ms. Gunther as well as the vaginal swab from Ms. Patton?
I was looking at the oral swab from Ms. Gunther and comparing the foreign profile to the foreign profile in Ms. Patton's vagina.
Okay. Was that case 0762 or was that Green?
762 is Julie Green.
Julie Green. Did you make a comparison with Julie Green and Ms. Gunther?
I did make a comparison with Julie Green and Ms. Gunther, and they were not consistent.
Okay. What did you find that was inconsistent, if anything? Did you find that there was another minor contributor, a male contributor to Ms. Green's swab of her vagina?
Basically, the foreign male profile in Julie Green's vagina did not match or was not the same profile that was in Miss Gunther's mouth. They were not even the same male.
And when you were comparing the DNA analysis that you found or identified in Ms. Gunther's mouth, were at the same time you were evaluating and then comparing that to the vaginal swab of Ms. Patton? Were you working on both cases at the same time for comparison?
No, I basically worked Miss Gunther's case first because her case came in first because she died first.
Yes.
And then Miss Patton's case came in a few months later. And so when I worked Miss Patton's case, I looked to see if the foreign DNA profile from her vagina, if it was possibly the same person. And when I looked at the minor foreign profile in Miss Patton's vagina, the loci that were there, the 8 loci that were there, the genetic markers, were the same as in the complete profile from Miss Gunther's mouth, so they were consistent.
And would you consider the 8 loci a very low end of, back in those days, you were looking at a 12 loci for a full comparison?
13.
13?
Mm-hmm.
So you were only 8 of the 13?
I would consider 8 of 13 a pretty good ratio, pretty high ratio.
Did you discover any other DNA of a minor contributor, male contributor?
Pardon me?
Did you, just in the vagina of Ms. Patton, did you discover any other DNA from even a minor contributor of someone other than the combination with Gunther?
I did not with the kit that I used, no.
Now, is it correct to say that what came up was it's a loci? What is the amalgamegenin, if I'm pronouncing that correctly?
You're not, but it's okay. It's amlogenin, and it's spelled AMELOGENIN. Amlogenin. It's a tongue twister. It's the sexing gene. Basically, it's not one of the 13 markers, but basically it lets us know if it's a female or male profile. So if there's an XX, it's a female. If it's an XY, it's a male profile. So that's how we know.
And did you discover any, the male amalgani there, whatever it's called?
Amlogenin.
Amalgam,
Yeah.
Did you discover that?
In which profile?
In the profile for Miss Patton.
In her vagina, the minor foreign profile was male, yes.
Was it more than one contributor or only one?
Her profile in the kit that I used appeared to only be her and a male, one male.
And I guess somewhere I was looking in the records, it appeared that you had opened the 0762 having to do with Ms. Gunther and the 0723 having to do with Ms. Patton at the same time.
Well, 762 is green, not Miss Gunther. And, go ahead.
Okay. So you did have those both open at the same time? You were,
Well, not literally open at the same time, but
Yeah.
they were cross-reference cases, yes.
what steps did you take in the examination even though you were doing them at the same time to prevent possible cross-contamination?
I work items separately, and I extract with controls, blank controls, as well as positive and negative controls in amplification process. There are controls throughout our entire process to check for any contamination and good laboratory procedure. So that's how I know.
Now, going back to the oral swab from Ms. Gunther, did you consume all of the DNA that was available in the swab that was provided to you in that case?
I consumed some of it, but I didn't consume all of it. Some of it was later consumed by Lee Clark, who did YSTR testing at a later date.
I'm not sure your records show it, but do you have an estimate of how much was left? Was half left, less than half?
I would say probably less than half.
Now, when breaking that down as far as the process, you have a DNA sample. How many times do you separate that for testing?
I don't understand your question.
Well, in the process of testing it, you just don't look at one piece of it. Don't you break it down in different parts and run that through a time test?
Yeah, basically the kit is a multiplex. It is highlighting those 13 areas at the same time. And when it goes through the DNA instrument, those fluorescent tags that are highlighted during the amplification process will go through the instrument, and the signal is detected as they go through a detection window as they go through the runtime of a couple of hours, and software collects the information. So the DNA sample is traveling through a capillary, which is like a gel, and it's separating out into size fragments during that couple-hour process. And the detection window is able to see the highlighted sections or the markers that we're looking at, those 13 areas, as they cross the detection window, and is able to take that information in.
And that is done mechanically by the machine you're using as opposed to by manually, is that correct?
By the instrument, yes.
You were asked a question earlier about how long DNA can remain in an individual's mouth
Yes.
after they are deceased. I'm trying to recollect your answer. What was your answer?
I basically said in a live person, the literature says up to 6 hours, but in a deceased person, basically, it would depend. I never really gave a firm answer. I basically said once a person quit moving, they're no longer rinsing their mouth of saliva because they're dead and their processes start breaking down. So it would just depend on the environment. If it's summertime and a body starts decomposing, then it depends on when you find the body. Because if they're decomposed, you might not be able to find anything.
Yes, ma'am. And in that regard, there isn't really any scientific literature that you are familiar with that would give you that time frame from the deposit of DNA or semen and the life in the throat of a dead person. Is that correct?
I don't really understand what you're asking.
Well, the time period that you had given, I think a little earlier, was your opinion. It's not based on scientific knowledge, publications in the industry and so forth by science.
Well, this is an article that says up to 6 hours in a living person, and in my opinion, just from what I have seen in my own work, I have never gotten a complete DNA profile from semen in someone's mouth in my entire career except this case.
Okay.
So that I was basing that on my own experience.
Would that go more to volume than time?
Pardon me?
Would that go more to the volume of DNA or the semen in this case, as opposed to the time element from deposit and death?
I was just saying that I believe that semen was deposited recently before she expired, because I just don't see how I could have gotten a complete profile if she had been moving and rinsing her mouth out and drinking and eating. I just can't imagine how I could have gotten a complete DNA profile at all those markers.
And I guess going back to that particular issue, your opinion is based on the fact that you got a complete profile at the time of her death. Now, initially, you didn't get a profile, is that correct, back when it was first tested?
When I first tested, I'd seen semen and I extracted it and I recovered it in a higher volume, and I did not get a DNA profile. So I went back and re-extracted and took another cutting. And on my second extraction, I recovered in a smaller volume, and I was able to get a complete profile.
Were you the analyst who was involved in finding the dry DNA in the bottom of an envelope in around 2018?
I was not in Orlando in 2018, so I believe you're speaking of Jillian Reese White.
And so do you have knowledge of her report?
I have so many reports of my own, I haven't read all of hers.
Yes, ma'am. Well, again, it's your opinion, not based on scientific literature as far as the exact time that it was deposited prior to her death, do you?
I'm just basing my opinion on 26 years of experience. So.
Okay. In that period of time, did you ever find DNA that was used to exonerate a person's involvement?
Objection to relevance, Your Honor.
Oh, just answer it if you understand the question.
I ran hundreds of reference DNA standards that people sent in, that the agency sent in, and I was able to exclude hundreds of male individuals that did not match this foreign DNA profile. So if you want to call that exoneration, sure.
Bear with me a moment.
Oh,
There's a-
take your time.
There's a lot of reports. There
Take
we
your
go.
time.
I think I heard earlier when you used the term that it's consistent, that is not necessarily in the jargon of a DNA analyst a match, is it?
Consistent in the way that I use it means the same.
Would it be correct to say that consistent means that there are other possibilities for someone to be included in the mixture?
There's another twin out there or somebody else has those same markers at that age, sure, they could be consistent too.
Back at the time that these were being done, wasn't the term consistent meant it's an opinion that they are the same as opposed to an absolute match?
I wouldn't say in its opinion, it means it's the same because it was technically reviewed by another analyst and then administratively reviewed by a supervisor, so it's more than an opinion by one person. It has to be technically sound to get released as a report.
Did you do any testing on the hair removed from Ms. Gunther's nails?
What item is that?
I'm sorry?
What specific exhibit is that?
I don't have that number here, but it was included on your list, and I think it may have been on the March 8th.
Q5C, hair removed from fingernail scrapings. A DNA profile was not obtained from the STR analysis of the root of exhibit Q5C. The shaft of this exhibit is being returned for possible mitochondrial testing. So I did not obtain a profile.
Now, in looking at the shaft, was it complete enough for analytical testing to determine the presence of DNA in the shaft? Or is it at the root of the shaft?
I didn't obtain a profile. I obtained the shaft for possible mitochondrial DNA testing that we don't do in our lab. So I'm not trained in mitochondrial DNA testing, so I'm not sure if it would be suitable.
Yes, ma'am. So the purpose of returning it was because you don't perform that type of test there.
Correct.
Do you know whether the hair found in both the left and right hands were identified as coming from an African American or another race?
I'm not a hair examiner, so I'm not qualified to give opinions on race on hairs.
Now, in returning that, would you have made any kind of recommendation of further testing by a person who would be trained to do that kind of testing?
We no longer do hair comparisons or testing at FDLE. We did many, many years ago, but we no longer do that. And so I don't know who does. I believe the FBI has even discontinued doing hair comparisons, so I'm not really sure.
Yes, ma'am. On March 7, 2006 report, you received a spent bullet, and I understand, did you examine that bullet?
I did.
And what were the results?
It failed to give chemical indications for the presence of blood when I tested it. I did a quick chemical phenolphthalein test on it, rubbed it with a piece of filter paper and added a series of chemicals to see if it would turn pink, to see if there was an indication of blood, and there was not. And I swabbed the bullet and ran it through DNA testing, and I did not obtain a DNA profile.
And what case was that applicable to? Was that Ms. Gunther?
That was submitted under Ms. Gunther's case, yes.
Did you also receive a evidence envelope with a black substance that was taken from the bottom of Miss Green's feet?
I received a swab from her left foot, if that's what you speak of.
Okay, approximately, you say you received a swab. What would the swab be giving you? Is it something you can identify by looking at to indicate that there may be rocks or pebbles or other items collected in that sample, or is it just a swab like you do for a DNA?
Well, in this particular submission from Ms. Green, they were swabs, like fancy Q-tip swabs that are sterile and individually wrapped. Crime scene investigators use sterile cotton tip swabs and moisten them with sterile water to collect samples at crime scenes or from bodies to collect potential bodily fluids or samples from different areas of the body. I'm assuming they were swabbing something of interest from her left foot.
And if you were collecting that off of any victim and there was greasy-looking material and possibly dirt and pebbles in it, would you need a larger portion of that to do an examination, particularly to maybe make reference to its source?
I really don't know how I would have sampled that.
Yeah.
We don't do that kind of testing for grease or lubricants or things of that nature, but I'm not really sure how I would have sampled that as a crime scene investigator.
Okay. Within FDLE, was there any kind of a group or agency that actually did that type of analysis to determine source material?
We don't have any testing for lubricant or dirt or any grease. We don't have a specific discipline for that.
So it would be correct to say then that nothing was submitted to you in reference to making that determination?
I was just looking for bodily fluids.
Yes, ma'am. So it would be correct to say that all of your work really had to do with the identification of preferably the DNA and semen as far as identifying a contributor.
I'm strictly trained in conventional serology and DNA testing. I don't do any other kind of testing. That's what I went to college for, and that's what I stayed in.
Thank you very much, Doctor.
Thank you.
Any reading, Brett?
Yes, Judge, just a couple of very quick questions. Ms. Baran, just to go back to a couple of things we talked about, the DNA sample you got from Mr. Mansfield, was that entered into CODIS?
It was.
And going to Ms. Green's case, the foreign profile that you had at 11 of 13 markers, was that entered into CODIS?
It was.
To your knowledge, up until 2013, when you stopped working on the case because you moved to Jacksonville, did you ever get any type of DNA hit from CODIS related to any of, whether it was Julie Green or Iwana Patton or Laquetta Gunther?
I had no hits on any of these cases.
And no matches to any of those two profiles?
None.
Wait 1 moment, Your Honor.
Yes,
That's all I have, Your Honor.
thank you.
Thank you.
Any recross? No additional, all right, thank you. They step
Thank
down.
you. Thank you.
Take on your medical right.
Judge, can I just call upon Ms. Green? We've got several.
Thank you.
She's not taking anything from,
No, sir. It's just all of her stuff.
Okay.
Next witness is Arlene Patrick.
You solemnly swear or affirm that the testimony you give in this call will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God.
I do.
Just you can wash your footing. Thank you. Have a seat.
good afternoon. Make sure you speak loud and clear into the microphone so they can hear what you have to say, okay?
Will do.
State, you may proceed.
Thank you, Your Honor. Good afternoon, ma'am.
Good afternoon.
Could you please state your entire name and spell your last name for the court reporter?
Arlene Patrick, Patrick.
And ma'am, where are you employed?
I work for the Palm Beach County Sheriff's Office.
And how long have you been employed there?
This is my 17th year.
What do you do for the Palm Beach County Sheriff's Office?
I am a crime scene investigator.
And how long have you been been in that specific role as a crime scene investigator?
The entire time with my employment with the Sheriff's Office.
Do you have any specialized training as a crime scene investigator?
Yes, I do.
Could you briefly describe that for the jury?
I have a bachelor's degree in a scientific discipline, as well as an associate's degree in criminal justice, specializing in crime scene. And as our ongoing training, we also do approximately 40 hours of continuing education in things in our discipline, such as fingerprinting, photography, DNA, swabbing, things like that, every year.
I want to take you back to March of 2016, specifically March 7th. Did you respond to a crime scene along the Beeline Highway?
Yes, I did.
Can you tell the jury what the Beeline Highway is?
The Beeline Highway at that section is a 2-lane road that's in a unincorporated part of Palm Beach County. It's a very open, grassy, rural area. It's the central leading toward the western part of the county.
And what was the nature of the call that you were brought out for?
I was brought out because a possibly deceased victim was found on the side of the road, and we were going to investigate what type of call it might have been or what type of case it might have been.
And were you the primary crime scene investigator that responded that day?
Yes, I was.
If I was to withdraw that question. And approach the witness, Your Honor.
You may.
Showing you, I think it's 4 pages, 4-page composite exhibit, marked for identification, states EE. Just look at those 4 photos if you can. Are those aerial or Google map views kind of the Central Florida and then down to the Palm Beach area?
Yes.
Do they accurately depict where the crime scene was, where Rachel Bay was located?
Yes.
Your Honor, at this time, I would move this into evidence as the next number of states exhibit.
No objection. No objection will be admitted.
Exhibit 32.
Permission to publish, Your Honor, on the TV.
You may proceed.
So here, Ms. Patrick, are we just kind of looking at the entire part of southern and central Florida?
Yes,
And does this pin, I know it's way zoomed out, but does this pin somewhat accurately reflect as best you can on this large map of where Miss Bay was located?
yes, in that general area.
Is this a closer view?
Yes.
Is 710 there, is that the actual Beeline Highway?
710 is the Beeline Highway, correct.
Going to the third photograph of the composite exhibit, is this a closer zoom in as well?
Yes, it is.
And this area, the green and looks like, are these marshy areas out here on Beeline Highway?
Yes, that is all wooded preserve land.
So is it beyond the developments that are in Palm Beach down here to the, I guess that would be the southeast?
Yes.
And finally, the last photo, is that zoomed in closer on the location where Rachel Bay was located and you responded on March 7th?
Yes, it is.
When you went out there that day, can you describe the condition of the roadway?
The roadway, that section of Beeline Highway is a two-lane road, one in each direction, and there was new lane construction undergoing on that same section of roadway. So there was paved road as well as a gravel area that was preparing for another section of roadway.
And when you got to the location after you observed the roadways and the paved and the gravel section, were other officers already there?
Yes, they were.
And was the victim still at this crime scene?
Yes.
And what did you observe of the victim when you arrived?
I could see a nude body on the side of the road that was away from the paved road, past the gravel area, almost into like the marshy woodland area.
And was the victim clearly deceased?
Yes, she was face down in the ground, on the ground, and no movement of any kind. Yet she had been pronounced deceased.
Can you describe for the jury, in your 16 years of experience as a crime scene investigator, how you go about processing crime scenes?
Our main focus is to document what is there, and we do that through photography mainly, as well as videography sometimes, sketches, we take notes. We do a search of the area to see if there's any potential items of evidence. We then would collect any potential items of evidence. Also, if there is a decedent in the scene, we would then document the decedent, or the victim in this case, and then process any potential items of evidence later on, and then we write a report and testify in court if necessary to our observations.
And did you process this crime scene in that manner?
Yes, I did.
With this crime scene, you mentioned the victim being naked on the side of the road. Were any of her clothes or possessions around her that you noticed?
No, there was nothing around her. There was no clothing, no purse, no wallet, no ID, nothing that would indicate her identity or anything else in that area. It was just her.
Was there even any blood around the victim's body?
No, there was not.
As a crime scene investigator with 16 years of experience, what did this lead you to believe?
That led us to believe that that was not the location and where she met her demise. She'd probably been deposited in that location after she was deceased due to the lack of a struggle, especially with her being naked, no clothing. So that's what we surmised.
And also, were there any markings leading up to the victim's body from the paved road?
Yes, there was.
And what did you observe? What were those markings?
There was a mark across the gravel roadway that appeared to be like a drag mark, as if something was dragged through the gravel from the roadway area toward where the decedent was located.
And did there appear to be injuries on the decedent's body that were consistent with perhaps being dragged over to that location?
Yes, there was areas of dirt and scratches on her shoulders and back, and her toes had also had damage to them.
Now, I think you mentioned earlier, but as a crime scene investigator, do you occasionally collect swabs?
Yes, we do.
And that's to collect potential DNA evidence?
Yes.
And how do you go about collecting swabs?
Well, it depends on if it's an item or a person. In this case, the procedure was pretty much the same. We use a pair of cotton tip swabs, which are like long Q-tips on a wooden stick. We use 1 drop of distilled water on each swab, and then vigorously rub the area that we're trying to collect any potential DNA with those swabs. Then they're placed into an envelope, allowed to dry, sealed, and packaged, submitted to our evidence unit.
And And to be clear, you don't collect sexual assault kits in the field, though, or just be to swab other items of evidence.
No, we do not do the sexual assault kit in the field, no.
That's up to the medical exam.
Correct.
In this case, with this body on the side of Beeline Highway, did you make the decision, or other detectives ask you, to swab the victim before she was transported for her autopsy?
Yes.
And where and why did you decide to swab this victim?
I'll do the why first. Because she was nude and it looked like she had been deposited in that area, somebody had to then transport her to there. So it was a good possibility that foreign DNA might have been on her body. And then the act of transporting her in a body bag to the medical examiner's office may have lost that potential DNA. So it was determined we needed to swab different areas of her body on scene prior to transport. So then I did that, including like her hands and her legs, her feet.
Did you also decide to swab the hands because of her appearing to have been dragged?
Yes.
And did you take digital photographs of this crime scene?
I did.
May I approach the witness, Your Honor?
You may.
I'm showing you a composite exhibit. It's FF. If you could just look through that exhibit and look up when you're done. Do you recognize those photographs?
I do.
What do those photographs depict?
Photographs I took of the crime scene where the decedent Rachel Bay was located.
Do they fairly and accurately represent the crime scene as it appeared to you that day?
Yes, they do.
Have they been altered or tampered with in any way that you consider?
Not that I can see, no.
Your Honor, I would move this composite exhibit into evidence as the next number of state's exhibit.
Can I see counsel sidebar just momentarily? No forward.
Oh.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, I want to reread you an instruction that I read to you before. So as not to belabor the point every single time, I want to modify the instruction so that it's very clear. As it relates to the death of Rachel Bay, the evidence that you are about to receive concerning other crimes, wrong, or acts allegedly committed by the defendant will be considered by you for the limited purpose of proving motive, opportunity, intent, preparation, plan, knowledge, identity, the absence of mistake or accident, and you shall consider that evidence only as it relates to those issues. Mr. Hayes is now on trial for that crime, wrong, or act that is not included in the indictment. Ms. Bay's death is not included in the indictment. Is there any objection to the exhibit?
No, Your Honor.
Without objection, the exhibit will be admitted as evidence. You may proceed.
Page number 30.
Judge, permission to publish the exhibit on TV?
You may proceed.
This is photograph A in the composite exhibit. What are we looking at here, Ms. Patrick?
This is showing the section of Beeline Highway where it's the two-lane road and the gravel section is on the right side of the photo where the new road was under construction.
Is this looking northbound?
Yes.
And photograph B of the composite exhibit, what are we looking at here?
This shows again the gravel section of new roadway that's being constructed, as well as a dirt area to the east of it. And you can see the decedent on the right side of the photograph near the center.
She kind of to the back right here.
Correct.
And going to photograph C of the composite, what are we looking at here?
That is a photograph again of the decedent and the roadway, and also showing from the bottom left corner the possible drag mark through the gravel area to where her body lays.
Can you point out that drag mark from there if you can? Thank you. You can hold on to that pointer when you need it again. Going to photograph D, what are we looking at here?
That is another view of the same drag mark area and of the decedent and the dirt and marshland right past where she lay.
I know we've seen a couple different angles of the area at this point. Are there any buildings, rest stops, gas stations, anything like that out in that area?
No, nothing, just roadway and trees.
Photograph E, is this another photograph of that kind of directly down that drag mark?
Yes, it's going straight up and down.
Going to F, what are we looking at here?
That is a close-up view of the same drag mark in the, across the roadway in the dirt.
And while I've got this up, did you see any tire impressions out at the crime scene?
I did,
Did you attempt to get a cast from those tire impressions?
I did.
And were you successful?
Unfortunately, no. The sand was very, very loose and it had rocks and shells in it. When I attempted to cast it, it ended up being almost perfectly smooth.
Thank you, ma'am. Let's go to photograph G. What are we looking at here? Is this another photo of those distinct drag markings?
Yes, it is.
H.
And this is the dirt area where, on the opposite side of the roadway, where the decedent was found, and that's how we found her.
And again, is this in fact marsh and water back here along the side of the roadway?
Yes, just past the darker area of dirt is almost like a marshy, it looked almost like a canal at that point. It was standing water, and right past the yellow barrier was forest.
Finally going to I.
And that is how we found the decedent.
I know we talked about some of the swabs collected. This is that's the decedent's left hand, right?
Correct.
That's been over there. And you said, did you swab the top of the left hand?
I did.
May I approach the witness, Your Honor?
You may.
Show you two more photographs. TT, and also, we'll leave that one there for now, that's UU. Let's talk about TT. Do you recognize that packaging that's photographed in TT?
Yes, I do.
Does it have labels related to this case on it?
Yes, it does.
Is that the envelope that you packaged the swabs you collected from Miss Bay's body?
Yes, that is the evidence bag that I put the swabs in. It contains our identification numbers, the unique case number, my initials, my name, and the date that I collected the items.
And does it fairly and accurately depict the evidence bag after you packaged it up?
Yes, with the addition of one other piece of evidence tape due to it being open for processing.
So that's the laboratory tape.
Correct.
Your Honor, at this time, I would move this item into evidence as the next numbered state's exhibit.
Any objection?
No objection, Your Honor.
Without objection, will be admitted as evidence.
Exhibit 34.
And permission to publish, Your Honor?
May do so.
is that same evidence bag you were just talking about?
Yes, it is.
And it has all the different spots you swabbed, such as top of right hand, top of right hand, top of left hand, and so on?
Correct.
And did you attend the autopsy in this case?
No, I did not.
Did you respond to the medical examiner's office to collect anything from the autopsy?
Yes, I did the next day after the autopsy was completed.
And did you collect a sexual assault kit from the medical examiner's office?
Yes, I did.
Before you have photograph that's marked for identification. It states UU. Do you recognize what is photographed in that exhibit?
Yes, I do.
What is it?
It is the bag that contained the sexual assault kit that was taken from the decedent, Rachel Bay, again with our unique identifying case number, my initials, my name, and it was sealed with evidence tape.
Does it fairly and accurately represent the evidence bag other than tape from the forensic unit as you package them, or as you receive them from the medical examiner's office?
Yes.
Altered or tampered with in any way that you can see?
No.
Your Honor, I'd move this item into evidence as the next number states exhibit.
Any objection? No objection. Without objection,
Ma'am.
exhibit.
Case number 35.
And permission to publish.
May I do so?
And is this the photograph, a blown up version of the photograph we were just talking about?
Yes, it is.
Does it even also have the medical examiner's name here who recovered it?
Yes.
And who was the medical examiner who recovered that item?
Dr. Gertrude Joost,
Can you spell it out, please?
Juste was the last name.
May I have one moment, Your Honor?
Yes, sir.
Thank you, ma'am. I'll tend to the witness.
All right, any cross-examination?
I have no crossword.
Thank you, lady. May the witness please state?
Yes, Your Honor.
Yes, thank you. All right, thank you. Lay that down. Okay, call your next witness.
Thank you.
We're just going to check and make sure he's arrived.
Yes.
Yeah, he's been
He's
previously
already
sworn,
been
isn't he?
sworn, he's still under oath.
Okay, watch your step, thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Good afternoon, Dr. Fulcher.
Hello,
Could you please just state your name for the record?
James William Fulcher.
I know we went through all of your credentials yesterday.
Yes,
And
sir.
today you're still a medical examiner?
Yes, still board certified.
If I can bring your attention, were you asked to review an autopsy for Rachel Bay that was conducted in Palm Beach County, Florida?
I was, yes, sir.
Do you know the case number that was assigned to Miss Bay from the Palm Beach County Medical Examiner's Office?
Yes, the case number is 16-0359.
Can you tell us how old Miss Bay was?
32 years of age.
What did Miss Bay weigh? What was her weight?
I will refer to the notes here. She is 138 pounds.
How tall was she?
She's 5'6" or 66 inches.
What was her race?
Black.
In your review of the autopsy, were you able to determine what the manner only of death was?
Yes, the manner of death in this case is homicide.
Let's talk about a few other injuries that may be consistent with dragging. Can you talk about some injuries that you noticed that would be consistent with someone being dragged?
Yes, there are multiple abrasions on extensor surfaces of the arms, legs, elbows, knees. If you can imagine, or if one can imagine a body being drugged along the ground, you generally have abrasions in a linear pattern on these exposed surfaces.
Did you review the toxicology for Ms. Bay, sir?
I did.
Was she positive for cocaine and opioids?
Yes.
Thank you, sir. May I have just a moment, Judge?
Yes, sir.
No further questions, Judge.
Thank you. Any cross-examination?
Briefly, Your Honor. Good afternoon, Doctor.
Hello, sir.
You just gave the age, weight, and height. Is the weight of 138 pounds for a 5 foot 6 inch tall lady at age 32 pretty common?
Yes, sir.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Anything else, State?
Your Honor, I was just asked to.
Oh, go ahead.
for that question. Thank you. There's no further questions.
Thank you.
No further questions, Judge.
Thank you, Dr. Fulcher.
Thank you, sir. I appreciate it.
State will call Stacie Brenner.
Thank you.
You can forward, please.
You solemnly swear or affirm that the testimony you shall give in this cause will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God? Yes.
Come around this way, please.
Just wash your foot. Have a seat. Thank you.
Be sure to speak loud and clear into the microphone so they can hear what you have to say, okay?
Okay.
You may proceed.
Thank you, Your Honor. All set?
Yes.
Okay. Could you please introduce yourself to the jury and spell your last name for the court reporter, ma'am?
My name is Stacie Brenner, Brenner, and I am a senior forensic scientist at the Palm Beach County Sheriff's Office in the Forensic Biology Unit.
And how long have you been doing that with the sheriff's office?
I've been there for a little over 7.5 years.
Can you describe for the jury your educational background?
I have a Bachelor of Science with a concentration in forensic science, and I also have a Master's in forensic science, and both of these degrees are from Cedar Crest College, which is in Allentown, Pennsylvania.
Could you describe for the jury over the last 7.5 years working in this capacity, what your day-to-day duties are?
As a forensic scientist in the Forensic Biology Unit, I am responsible for testing items of evidence for biological fluids, such as blood and semen. And as a forensic scientist, I am writing reports to these findings, and then I'm asked to testify to these findings. I also may be involved in new instrumentation in the laboratory or training of new analysts as well.
What type of training do you have in DNA analysis?
Besides everything from my education and the experience I have in college, I have completed an approximate year-long training program at the Sheriff's Office. And the training program consisted of lectures, presentations, working in the laboratory and seeing demonstrations, as well as working on my own samples that, like mock case samples, as well as a mock trial. And after this training, I completed a competency exam as well.
And over the last 7.5 years, how do you go about staying current in your field?
Not only as an analyst, do I read the literature that comes out yearly, I'm also involved in going and attending conferences, whether these are in person or virtual. So I always have continued training and conversations that continue at these conferences with other scientists in the field.
Does your agency do proficiency testing?
Yes, they do.
What is proficiency testing?
Proficiency testing is a test that is administered by an outside company or agency, and this is a test that assesses the analyst's ability to perform the testing that we do in the laboratory correctly, accurately, and reliably following our correct protocols.
Have you testified as an expert in the field of DNA identification and analysis?
Yes, I have.
How many times have you had to estimate?
Approximately 50 times.
And I'm guessing the majority of them down in the Palm Beach County area.
Yes.
Now, the jury's already heard about what DNA is and how it works. So I'd like to jump to you describing the process by which you work a sample from the moment it comes into your laboratory.
So once a sample is received, as a DNA analyst, I'm typically receiving these samples as a cutting from possibly a piece of fabric, but most likely it is from a swab that has previously been collected by someone else in the laboratory. So once I have this information or sample on a swab, I need to now remove it from the swab, and I need to process this sample, and I need to generate a DNA profile is the goal. So when I am performing DNA analysis, this has approximately 5 steps. The first step is going to be to extract the DNA from the sample. So the DNA is inside the cell, and if you think of the cell like an egg with a yolk, inside that yolk is the DNA information. So we need to open these cells and purify the DNA that's present. So that's the first step, where I extract the DNA from the actual sample. The second step is the quantification, and this is where I determine how much DNA is actually present, and is this DNA human DNA, which is what I'd like to work with. The third step is then amplification, and this is where I'm going to make hundreds of millions of copies of the areas of interest on the DNA. So I'm looking at certain locations on the DNA, and in this step, this is where I am making a lot of copies of this information so that I can further visualize it in the next step. In this next step, this is where I can visualize the DNA. It is separated by size, and it looks like a chart or a graph where I see certain the DNA information in almost like a peak or a mountain on a chart. And this is where I have the information that I can now look at and compare to any known information that I have. So I'll have an unknown sample with the DNA information, and then I have a known sample of DNA information, and I can compare these two.
This process that you've described, is it commonly accepted within the scientific community?
Yes.
And what profiling system does the Palm Beach County Sheriff's Office use?
We currently use a system called PowerPlex Fusion 6C.
And what's the purpose of the profiling system?
This is a kit that we buy from a vendor, and this has the particular locations that we are looking at with the DNA information. So these locations are called loci, and these are the areas that we're going to use for comparison.
And how many locations does the PowerPlex Fusion 6C allow you to retrieve?
This looks at 27 different locations.
Now, back in 2016, were you using a different version of the PowerPlex Fusion?
Yes, we were using a version, it's also called PowerPlex, but it was Fusion 5C, and this actually had 24 locations. So the difference is just 24 locations compared to 27 that we look at now.
And the work we're about to get into that you did on this case, that was with the 5C version?
Yes, that's correct.
Brenner, did you do some work back in 2016 in relation to Palm Beach County Sheriff's Office case number 16-047704?
Yes.
Did you issue actually two separate reports in relation to your work on the case?
Yes, I have 2 reports.
And what was the date of that first report?
The first report is dated 11/28/16.
And what items were submitted for you to look at in this report?
May I refer to the report?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay.
Refresh your recollection.
So there are various items that were submitted. The first was submission 2, which was titled Sexual Battery Evidence Collection Kit from Rachel Bay. And this kit actually contained various items from 2A to 2F, which are items that are typically collected in a sexual battery evidence collection kit. And submission 3 were 2 blood standards from Rachel Bay. Submission 7 were swabs from Rachel Bay, which were also a variety of different items that were body swabs. And then submission 8 was hair standards and fingernail clippings from Rachel Bay. And submission 17 I received were 2 oral standards from Jose Gonzalez.
And in this report from late 2016, I want to talk specifically about item 2A from submission 2 from the sexual assault kit.
Okay.
Were those the genital swabs?
Yes, that's correct.
And did you subject these genital swabs to the DNA processing process that you described earlier?
Yes, the one difference that was performed on the sample is the type of extraction. So this is the step where I'm trying to get the DNA from the swabs. I performed an extraction that's called a differential extraction. And what this is a way to separate sperm cells and epithelial cells. So often this type of extraction is used for a type of sample like genital swabs or vaginal swabs so that male DNA can possibly be separated from female DNA. And when I do this type of extraction, I then generate 2 different sample types. And they are called the non-sperm fraction, which would contain most likely epithelial cells, and then the sperm fraction, which would contain the sperm cells or any male DNA. So for this sample, I actually have 2 results, one for a non-sperm fraction and one for a sperm fraction.
Is that the difference between the 2A and 2B? I'll strike that question. Let me talk about the sperm fraction. What did you find in results from the sperm fraction analysis?
So when the sperm fraction was actually processed, the sample indicated the presence of 2 individuals, and the major DNA profile, so the individual that is making up the most DNA in that sample, was consistent with the DNA profile obtained from Rachel Bay. And the other individual who a standard was submitted, Jose Gonzalez, was excluded as a contributor to the mixture.
So just to take one small step back, so you actually had the known DNA profile from Rachel Bay?
Yes, that's correct.
And you were able to look at that, is it okay to call it a mixture?
The 2A, the sperm fraction, yes, this was a mixture of 2 individuals.
So 2 individuals, primarily Rachel Bay.
That's correct.
Did you have enough information about the other person in that mixture to make a comparison?
Yes.
And that was where you said you compared it to Mr. Gonzalez?
Yes. So any other standard that I had at the time, I would compare to the second individual. And I only had Jose Gonzalez, so at that point, that individual was excluded as a contributor.
Thank you. Are you familiar with CODIS, ma'am?
Yes.
And we've heard about CODIS already, was this male DNA profile from this mixture, was it sufficient to place into CODIS?
Yes, it was.
So it met the standards of CODIS for it to go into the system?
Yes.
Now I want to draw your attention to additional testing I think that was in a report dated April 28th of 2017.
Yes, that's correct.
In this submission, did you actually test item 6C?
Yes, this was titled swabs from the top of left hand, and they were swabs from Rachel Bay.
And did you subject it to the same DNA processing you previously described?
Yes.
And what were the results of your testing on item 6C?
This sample indicated the presence of 3 individuals, and Rachel Bay could not be excluded as being a contributor to the mixture. And additional comparisons are possible to that mixture, to the rest of the mixture.
All right, so just to break that up a little bit, unlike the previous findings on the genital swabs, this mixture had 3 individuals.
That's correct.
But you had enough data about the individuals to make a comparison if you had a known sample.
That's correct.
Did you end up entering this item into CODIS as well?
Yes. The foreign profile from the genital swabs 2A was actually removed at this time, since I was now entering the information from 6C. So the goal is to put the sample with the most information into the database. And because these 2 samples were consistent with each other, I removed the one that had less information and put in the one that had more.
And that was my next question. The foreign profile or the foreign information you had was consistent from the genital swabs and the swabs at the top of the left hand.
Yes, that's correct.
And you chose to put the second one in to CODIS because it had more data.
That's correct.
Now, you didn't do any later comparisons in this case, did you?
No, I did not.
But did you do technical review of another analyst's work in this case?
Yes, I did.
And who was that other analyst?
The other analyst was Stacie Anderson.
And when you technically review an analyst's work, what do you look at?
As a technical reviewer, which is also another responsibility of mine as a forensic scientist, I am looking at the analyst's report, the data they've generated, any notes they've made, and ensuring that all of their work all their technical work has scientific basis and has followed our protocols.
I want to draw your attention to a report that was first issued on August 29th of 2019. Familiar with that report?
Yes.
And are you familiar with the work that Ms. Stacie Anderson did related to that, the results that are outlined in that report?
Yes, I am.
Did you find her work to be sound and rely on scientific principles?
Yes.
And what items was she submitted to look at in that report?
The additional item that she tested in this report was submission 29, which was a water bottle from John Dion Barfield.
And was she able to extract a profile or find a male profile on that water bottle?
Yes, she was.
And was it a complete profile?
Yes.
Did she have sufficient data from that profile to compare it to the DNA that was found on the left hand and the vaginal swabs?
Yes, she did.
And was she able to draw any conclusions from that comparison?
Her conclusions for the water bottle, the profile obtained from the water bottle compared to submission 2A, the genital swabs, and submission 6C, swabs from the top of the left hand, is that individual was excluded as being a contributor to that mixture.
So just like Jose Gonzalez was excluded, this source, this John Barfield, was excluded.
That's correct.
Can I have one moment, Your Honor?
Yes, sir.
Just going back to the vaginal swabs, and generally in your experience, when a vaginal swab is collected and submitted to your lab, is it common that the major DNA profile is going to be the female source?
Yes, when we obtain a swab that comes from an individual, the expectation is, or it is common that the major profile is actually the person who is donating that sample.
And again, that's why you like to have their known DNA.
Yes, that's correct.
Thank you, ma'am. I'll tender the witness, Your Honor.
All right, thank you. Any further examination?
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Are you familiar with touch DNA?
Yes, I am.
I want to word this so it's not embarrassing in any way. Could touch DNA be deposited on a arm and on a shoulder and so forth during a person having a sexual encounter?
Yes, I would say that's possible. When an individual comes in contact with something, they have a possibility of leaving their DNA behind.
Thank you.
Any redirect?
Just quickly, Judge. On the DNA that you recovered from the top of the left hand, was that sperm on top of the left hand, or was it touch DNA or epithelial cells?
I cannot say exactly what the source of DNA is. I can say that I did not perform a differential extraction, which is the extraction that we look at to directly separate sperm cells. So a typical extraction was performed, and I can't really say to the source of that sample.
But you didn't need to use the extraction method you used for sperm cell fractions?
That's correct.
Okay, thank you, ma'am. I have no further questions.
Thank you. Anything else?
Briefly, Your Honor. No further questions.
All right, thank you. Can the witness be excused?
Yes, Your Honor.
Defense, can the witness be excused?
Yes.
Thank you, you may step down. Let's take our mid-afternoon break. Take a 15-minute break. We'll resume at 3:05. 3:05.
Witness.
I'm sorry.
Yeah.
You can let him go out front. Just want to remind you all not to talk about the case, okay? Did you recess? What we recess?
Your Honor, was the court going to call precision imaging the state?
Say it again?
Was the court going to tell precision imaging to see if we get any sooner like the state suggested, or just go?
I'll make a phone call. I don't know if they're gonna listen to me or not.
Any help the court can give, we appreciate it.
Okay.
Did you want to go to the P office on the third floor? Then you just go ask, who would know that last night? He's the P office. Yeah.